Closed captioning for Justice and Law Weekly is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices in support of quality public television for the Chicago area.
Hello, I'm Aurora Austriaco, President of the Chicago Bar Association, and welcome to another edition of Justice and Law Weekly. My guest today is Lawrence Baca, one of our nation's leading legal experts in federal Indian law. Mr. Baca was one of the first American Indians to graduate from Harvard Law School and was the first American Indian ever hired through the Department of Justice Honor Law Program. Upon his retirement in 2009, Mr. Baca was presented the Attorney General's Medallion, the highest award the Attorney General can present. Mr. Baca has received numerous national honors and is the recipient of the American Bar Association's 2012 Thurgood Marshall Award. Welcome, Mr. Baca, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Very pleased to be able to come over here.
I'm sure coming from San Diego and then coming here to Chicago, it's such a big difference, right?
Well, we consider San Diego paradise. I have alleged more than once that if they translate the Dead Sea Scrolls properly, they'll find that Adam and Eve actually grew up in San Diego and were cast into Los Angeles.
Okay. That's a good background, thank you. But let's start with the obvious. You are the recipient of the 2012 Thurgood Marshall Award, which is given by the Individual Rights and Responsibilities Committee of the American Bar Association.
Yes.
And congratulations again with that one. I'm assuming it is safe to say that it is the highest civil rights award that is available.
Yeah, it's absolutely the most prestigious civil rights award given in the country. And I'm overwhelmed. As I will say to the audience tonight, I feel like the American Bar Association has planted me among the tall trees in the civil rights movement and lawyers in our country. When you're practicing law as a civil rights lawyer, you don't think of yourself in those terms, is that you don't do it because someday there might be an award attached to it. And when somebody comes along and says, hey, let me measure your career for you, we're going to nominate you for this award, you're overwhelmed by the thought that your colleagues would nominate you. And then, of course, when K. Hodge calls you, you're again overwhelmed by the thought that you'd be included among the people who've received the award in the past.
Right, and it's a very, very well-deserved award with everything that you have actually done.
Thank you so much.
So the feeling is great. So tell us when you actually got that call from K. Hodge. Did your jaw drop? Well,
one of the beauties of the way the section does it is that they call you many months in advance. And K. Hodge calls, and of course Kay and I have known each other for years.
Right.
I'd been on the Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity in the ABA, and Kay was a member also. And so she says, oh, Lawrence, are you going to come to the ABA annual meeting? Yeah, Kay, I'm thinking about it. Any particular reason?
Right.
Well, you've been selected to receive, and you're stunned. Absolutely stunned at the moment. I have been to many of those dinners. I've seen the qualifications of the people who were there. And again, you don't measure yourself in terms of saying, oh, someday maybe I'll be up there. And so it's still a bit overwhelming when you think about it. Yeah. But it's great to be here in town, and it's going to be a great dinner. Be a lot of people I've worked with in the ABA who are there in the audience.
Right, right. Now, let me ask you this, and I know there's always an issue with regards to which is the proper term. Is it American Indian, or is it Native American, or is it Indian?
Well, you know what's fascinating about that is that I used to tell audiences when I was lecturing about race that for most of my childhood I was an other, because when you looked at the Census Bureau and most reports that were put out, they were about Anglo-Americans, African-Americans, and others.
Right.
Then, of course, they started reporting statistics on Hispanics, and eventually they caught up with us. And so when you look at some of my writings, I've got this one long footnote where I talk about it, and I say, well, can we really be Native Americans because it wasn't America we were native to? We just called it home.
Yeah.
And I tend to use Native American, American Indian, and Indian interchangeably when I'm talking, and I will drift back and forth without even knowing I'm doing it.
Right.
But American Indians are mentioned in the Constitution 3 times. We're actually the only race mentioned specifically by race in the Constitution. It's in the Commerce Clause, in the Enumerations Clause, and then again in the 14th Amendment, which amends the Enumerations Clause. And so what I will tell audiences is 2 things. One, Indian is our legal name. If you look in the United States Code, it's 50 titles. Title 25, dead center, is Indians. And it's there is a title to the U.S. Code called Indians because we're affected so much by federal law because of those three constitutional provisions. So the other thing I tell audiences is that we have organizations called the Native American Bar and the American Indian something else. So basically, look around and see what the people you're going to talk to call themselves.
Right.
When you look at our tribal names, most of us were originally called the people or the people of something. So you have like the Dene. Well, they're the Navajo, but Dene means the people. The people who are now called Tohono O'odham, because it's their original name, used to be Papago, which is a Hispanic term, but their name translates to the people of the desert. And so what I say to audiences is, when you walk among the people, ask them what they call themselves.
Right. And interestingly enough, I know you have the tribes, and your background is which tribe do you?
Pawnee. My
Pawnee,
father was Pawnee. My mother was non-Indian, and so and this is one of the things that you grow up with is you're in front of an audience and they'll say, "Well, you're half Anglo and you're half Indian. Why do you call yourself an Indian?" I respond, "Society made me an Indian."
Yeah.
When I was growing up in high school, there were girls that I could not go out with because I was half Indian. There were no girls that I could not go out with because I was half white.
Right.
And so sociologically, societally, I am an Indian.
Right.
But the reality is, I talk of myself as being mixed race. I am. I'm not going to.
As most of us are.
Yeah, you can't say I'm one or the other. But in some ways, society will make you one of those things. And so, for some of us, you define yourself in a manner that was used against you at some point in your life. Growing up in Southern California, nobody thinks of California as Indian country. And the fact is, there are 108 federally recognized tribes in California. Alaska has 228. There is no other state with more federally recognized tribes than California.
Right.
So it may not be Indian country, but there are lots of Indian people there.
Right.
San Diego County has 17 Indian reservations in it. So growing up in the 50s, when you went out in the rural area, there were signs in some of the restaurants and at parks and movie theaters saying no Indians allowed. And so because my father was full-blood Indian, because his sons were mixed-race Indian, there were places that we weren't allowed to go. And so again, that helps you define who you are because of societal norms, as opposed to you sitting down and thinking about it and saying, well, gee, what am I today?
Right.
There's a law professor at Harvard who talks about the president having struggled at some point in his life with, I don't know what I am, I'm mixed race. I've never had that struggle.
Yeah.
I've always been an Indian.
Right. Now, it's interesting. You grew up in San Diego, and I think friends of yours jokingly term you as the beach Indian.
Yes.
And tell us about that. And from there, what path, describe the path from being a beach Indian to being at the podium tomorrow receiving the Thurgood Marshall Award.
Well, yeah, and the beach Indian is cute because my tribe is actually in Oklahoma. The Pawnee Nation originated in Kansas, Nebraska, was removed at a point in time in history when all American Indians were being taken away from their own territory. Indian country was what is now Oklahoma, or was Indian territory. So the Pawnee Nation was moved there. We have a reservation there, and that's where all our tribal leadership are. And so the term beach Indian was coined because I actually grew up 1,000 miles from most of the members of my tribe. And of course, what happens next, like I said, I grew up in an area where there was a racialized environment. A lot of people don't understand about California is that there was actually a time in history when an American Indian was not allowed to testify in court where Anglos were involved. An Indian was not allowed to testify in a criminal case against white people. And so it's against that racialized backdrop that I go off to college, and I started at UC San Diego, and then I transferred to UC Santa Barbara. At Santa Barbara, I wind up working both on the reservation at Santa Ynez, tutoring kids to prepare them for high school and hopefully then college. But a letter comes in to the university from a group of Indians in Lompoc Federal Correctional Institution. In the nuances of federal Indian law, there are specific statutes that provide crimes on an Indian reservation that are by an Indian against the person or property of another Indian are tried in federal court as opposed to state court or tribal court. So we have a much larger population of American Indians in prison than you would imagine by our population nationally. Well, at Lompoc, which was a prison for younger inmates, inmates under the age of 30, they had this population of Native Americans who formed an organization called the Tribe of Five Feathers. Right. Well, there's a very smart bunch of guys considering that they were in federal prison.
Yeah.
They knew that they should have outside contact. By outside contact, what they said to me was, we want to have conversation with people who haven't committed crimes, people who weren't on drugs or alcohol, so that when we get released, we know how to have a conversation with people who weren't otherwise cons.
Right.
So the first step along the way then is to see these guys in the toughest of situations really wanting and trying to make better of their lives. For the record, not a single man that was inside ever said to me, I didn't do what I was convicted of. They did all say, if I'd had private representation, if I'd had an opportunity to present a better case, I probably wouldn't be in here for as long as I am. They do really believe that there was a different justice for people who could hire private lawyers.
Right.
So you start to think in your own life about what is it that I can do. Now, for the guys at Lompoc, I asked them, what is do you think I can do for you? I'm a college kid.
Right.
They said, well, you know, we don't have classes. The other racial inmates, racialized inmates, have classes. We'd like our own classes. I said, what can I teach you? They said, well, teach us what you know. Well, it's an interesting phenomenon that when you face the parole board, most American Indians, particularly if you've grown up on a reservation, we learn that the way you show respect for someone in a position of authority is to look down. It's what I call looking at your boots. Well, when you face a parole board that is all Anglo,
Right.
and you look down when you talk to them about what your life plans are, they don't believe you. So another colleague of mine, Liz Schufs, the two of us put together a speech and English course. And again, these are all reservation kids. Most of them are young men. Most of them went to BIA boarding schools, didn't have the best command of English. So we taught them two things. One, proper English grammar.
Right.
And number two, how to face the parole board and say to them, when I get out of here, my sister's going to let me live in the spare room at her house as long as I stay off drugs and alcohol. Father O'Herlihy down at the church has got me into an Al-Anon program, and you know that the whole time I've been in prison, I've been in a program. Then Father O'Herlihy has also got me a job at the local gas station. The man there's going to teach me how to fix cars. For a month I'm working for free, but then once I learn how to fix cars, he's going to pay me. And then my sister's going to let me leave because I'll be able to pay for my own apartment.
Right.
What a tremendous thing. You're able to explain a life plan to the parole board. Well, two things happened. The parole rate for American Indians went up fivefold during the time that we worked with the inmates. And most importantly,
The parole rate?
parole rate.
Okay.
Yeah, Indians had the lowest parole rate of any group in the prison, so the parole rate increased. My emotions get to me all too quickly. No man who was released during the time that we worked with them came back. The recidivism rate for prisons in America is incredibly high for American Indians, probably higher than most. So we were extremely proud that our guys got out and followed the life plans that they had. So it's from those origins then that you make the decision, going to law school is something that I can do to affect the lives of people.
Right, right. That's incredible. Now, have you continued representing inmates to this day?
I did not. Of course, it's an interesting phenomenon. I had gone to law school with one thought and one only in mind. I was going to go back to California and work with the California Indian Legal Services. And I actually clerked with them for the summer after my second year of law school. And the man who hired me knew that I was Native and was prepared to offer me a job straight out at the end of the year to graduate and come back.
Right.
Well, they changed directors over the summer, and the new guy didn't realize I was Native American. He thought because my last name is Baca that I was Hispanic.
Right.
The reason that that's important is because the program had a preference for American Indians. And when I called him at the end of the summer and said, hey, I've had a wonderful time down here, I'd like to come to work for you full time, he said, oh, well, yeah, we'd like to look at your resume. Why don't you send it in, and we accept applications after November. We make decisions in January. Well, I'm sitting there going, there are only 15 American Indians in the entire United States graduating from law school next year. I'm at an Ivy League school, not that there should be a bias, but there is. And I've worked for these guys all summer, and the people I've worked with liked my work. And this guy's saying, get your application in and we'll make decisions in January. So I started applying other places. Well, one of the places that I'd heard about from a classmate was the Office of Indian Rights in the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice. That was the offer that came through first. Well, the idea of going to work for the United States Department of Justice, how do you say no to that? And so I had accepted that position. before the offer came through from California Indian Legal Services. So it's an interesting career. I actually thank George every once in a while for not making an offer to me, because it opened what I think is a much larger door, the opportunity to pursue justice with the power of the Department of Justice.
Right.
And the reason that that's a partial answer to your question is because the Civil Rights Division has a set of statutes that are passed by Congress that give the Attorney General authority to enforce them. None of those would include defending prisoners. Now, the Civil Rights Division would in fact get involved if prisoners were being denied certain basic rights. One of the matters that I worked on at one point was religious freedom for American Indian prisoners.
Right.
Native inmates were not allowed access to holy men, not allowed access to the proper tobacco for prayer. Actually, connect, not tobacco. Possession of eagle feathers to use in prayers, and cutting our hair. Many of our inmates want to wear their hair natural and uncut. The prisons want everybody to look uniform so that if you escape, you're much easier to find. Not sure that should be a concern in the modern digital age, because if you cut your hair and shave, I can produce a digital image of you that looks like what you did look like or what you would look like in a hot minute.
Right, Photoshop, right?
Right. So the answer is I have not worked with prisoners since that time, but of course got involved in civil rights of Native Americans in numerous cases.
Right. And you did mention the fact that, you know, American Indians are actually treated differently.
Yes.
A lot. Do you still see that happening?
Yeah, I still believe there's a distinction out there. There's still, and race discrimination happens on so many different levels and in many different ways. And it's everything from you walk into a restaurant where they look at you and make a facial distinction that you're an American Indian and you're not accepted, to places that might have a policy or practice in place. I actually in my career had a woman call me and say, I work in a restaurant where there's a sign in the kitchen that says, remember, don't serve the Indians. And she said the restaurant was near an Indian reservation and that the waitresses and the man who worked the front door were told when Indians come, tell them that all the tables are reserved and that they need to wait, and just make them sit in the waiting area until they get tired or really hungry and will leave. The next level, of course, and this may be among the most important, is at the educational level. We're failing our kids. We're not getting our kids through the process. Now, of course, a whole separate argument. I have a problem with the national system of education. I went to school at a time where a public school education was great in California. It could get you into college and project you then on into law school. But I think as a nation, we're underfunding education. That problem then, I think, overflows and has a greater effect on kids who are from lower income areas. And of course, American Indians are among the lowest income people in the country. And so people like myself and others need to be working, if we can, with schools and with kids to get them to understand that a basic education is the best thing for your future. When you look at the distinction between what someone has in income over their lifetime with a high school degree or with a college degree, it's severe.
Right.
And kids need to understand that. And also, I think it's just good for you generally to have a well-balanced, well-rounded education as a matter of living well.
Right. Well, it's talking about schools. I know there was a phenomenon that's going on, and I know you have done something with regards to this, where students were actually checking off boxes where they're identifying themselves as Native American or American Indian, even though they're not.
This is a phenomenon that in the Native community, particularly among the Native American bar, we talk about it as box checkers.
Right.
Sometimes we refer to the people who do this as wannabes or Clorox Indians, but for the most part, we call them box checkers. Here's the way it functions. There are a lot of people who think that affirmative action programs are wrong and that there are schools who are giving you points for being a person of color. And with a belief that that's wrong, they challenge it by saying, well, then I'll check that I'm a person of color. Well, most people who are not a racial or ethnic minority will not check the black box, the Hispanic box, or the Asian box, but they will check the Native American box. There's a sociological phenomenon to people who claim to be Indian. Back in 1968, Vine Deloria Jr., great American Indian author, wrote in his book, Custer Died for Your Sins, that when he worked in Washington, half of everybody who came to visit him would say, oh, you're an Indian. Well, I'm part Cherokee. Well, he said the phenomenon was, one, 90% of them claimed to be the same tribe, and then 90% of those said, my great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess. multiple problems with that. In his estimation, there were no men among the Cherokee 3 generations back. Number 2, we didn't have princes and princesses. So you know somebody's making it up.
Right.
Well, that phenomenon is so pervasive that my friends who are Cherokee are afraid to tell you their tribe for fear that people will think you're from this part Cherokee group that's making it up. Well, sociologists will tell you that there's a phenomenon where people want to have a connection to America, and because their families are immigrants, no matter how far back that immigration may have occurred, they still want to say, I'm a part of America, the roots of America are in native people, and so they invent it. Well, okay, if you're at a party and someone wants to say, I'm part Indian, who cares? That's cool, we can share stories. But at the college and law school level, what it means then is that if an institution believes that it has native students when it really doesn't, 2 things are happening. One, the diversity you wanted in the class so that the discourse in the classroom includes a variety of voices isn't there because there are people who said they were from this group and they can't represent that group with their voice in class because they're not from it. Then when they move on to law school, the same thing is true. Well, the other part of the equation is if somebody's getting a seat because the school thinks they're native, then a person who is native probably isn't getting a seat because there are only so many people that can get into any class in the college or law school ranks. And so the next level then is the judiciary, where there have only been 2 American Indians on the federal bench in my entire lifetime and in the history of the courts. Well, unless we go to law school first and get into the practice, we're never going to make it to the federal bench. So it's a thing that compounds from the beginning. The numbers that we've generated are interesting. We've talked about this in the Native bar community for years, and it's always in terms of anecdotal stories. I tell a great story about going to UC San Diego, and back in the early days, before there were student right to privacy laws, you could go to the universities and say, give me a list of everybody who says they're Indian. So myself and another student in 1969 got a list at the University of California, San Diego, and it had 26 names on it. Well, we went and talked to all of those kids, and it turned out only 5 of them were actually Indians. The others just checked the box. Some said, oh, I think I may have a great-grandparent who's native. But for the most part, they simply said, oh, I did it by accident or as a joke, and I'm not an Indian. 80% non-Indian checking Indian is pretty frightening.
That's a high number.
So I started asking, how can I demonstrate that this is occurring at the law school level? Well, I looked at the Bureau of the Census. And about a decade ago, the American Bar Association gave out for the first time disaggregated statistics that show graduations with a JD by race. So I can look then and say in 2001, X number of people were given degrees who the law school believes is an American Indian, and they got a JD. So when you look at the numbers between 1990 and 2000, and I use those numbers because we don't have figures for the 2010 census yet. The Native American law population, Native American lawyers, between 1990 and 2000 grew by 228. Interesting number, about 28 a year. When you look at the statistics for the Census Bureau, it's the 228 figure. When you look at for the statistics that law schools gave to the American Bar Association, they claim to have graduated 2,306 American Indians.
Big disconnect there.
There's a big disconnect there. I created what I call the grad to growth rate. Well, grad to growth rate means that you take the growth in numbers by the census with the graduation rate alleged by law schools. And again, the American Bar Association is not making up these statistics. The law schools are reporting them. And the law schools are not making them up. The students are calling themselves Indian. So it's the student who's generating the numbers. What I did was to compare the same figures for African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, and white lawyers. Well, what's fascinating is when you make those comparisons for African Americans and for white lawyers, you compare the number of graduates over that decade to the growth of lawyers that are white or black, they come in at around 50% or 30%. When you make that same comparison for Asians and Hispanics, the numbers are 49% and 51% respectively. Well, then for American Indians, we're at 10%. So we're 1/3 of the rate for African Americans or Anglos and 1/5 of the rate, or 20% of the rate, for Hispanics or Asians. The best explanation I've got for this is that the black bar and the white bar are comparable in age. And so the number of people who are dying or retiring percentage-wise is probably the same. And so having both of them at 50% and comparable to each other is logical. Well, then, of course, Asian lawyers and Hispanic lawyers are probably all quite young. I think the two bars are among the youngest in terms of age
Right.
and time in the bar. So you don't have a lot of lawyers who've retired or who have died. Well, American Indians should be comparable to Asians and Hispanics because we're a very young bar. I mean, I'm a young guy at 62,
Right.
and I'm at the top of the pyramid in terms of the age range of American Indian lawyers. So our grad to growth rate should be somewhere comparable to the 49, 51% that we
Right.
see for that. So far, no one has given me any other explanation when I put those numbers out for why the numbers are there. There's some people who tell me I'm probably wrong, that because my solution is to say that there are a lot of Indian kids in law school who really aren't Indian. And some people have challenged that, but they've never come up with a reason to challenge it other than, gee, I'm not sure you can make that case.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of the checking the box, how do you prevent it then? I mean, how do you confirm that they're American Indian? Is there like a certificate that they have to show? Or?
Well, there are things that the law schools can do. It's interesting. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about, I wonder if anybody has looked at the LSAT forms that people filled out and how many Native Americans took the LSAT.
Right.
And so the question is, was the kid an Indian when he took the LSAT, or did he become an Indian when he applied to law school? But the fact is, because American Indians are members of tribes, we have multiple citizenships. We're citizens of the states we live in, we're citizens of the United States, but we're also citizens of our tribes. And so in fact, what the law school can do when someone says, I'm Native American, is ask them, do you have an enrollment card? What's the tribe you're from? Do you have a connection with your tribe? Now, I don't expect any kid to join the NALSA group. I don't expect any stereotype Indian behavior.
Right.
But I think the law schools can ask the question because we are part of a body politic. Now, one of the reasons that this becomes important is because the Supreme Court has actually held that the federal government can have programs where they discriminate in favor of American Indians in employment practices. And in fact, when you look at Title VII, the Anti-Discrimination Employment Law, Title VII actually has an exemption in it for employers who are on or near Indian reservations, and they may have a preference for members of federally recognized tribes
Right.
if they advertise that they're using a preference. What the Supreme Court said in Morton versus Mancari was that that's a political preference, not a racial preference. And while you probably racially have to be Indian to be a member of the body politic, the fact is the preference in those cases are about your being a member of a federally recognized tribe. So what it means then for Indian people is that we have this dual distinction where Indians are a political group as well as Indians are a racial group.
Right, right. You know, it's actually very interesting because there's so many questions that I could really ask you, and it's just, you know, it's just really incredible. But I think being an Asian and, you know, talking about American Indians or Native Americans or Indians, however you term it, I think we have a lot of similarities in terms of, you know, issues and challenges that face us, but distinct as well.
Absolutely. It's very interesting that you raised that issue because there's a very famous case out in California. I can't remember the title of it at the moment, but the question before the Supreme Court of California is whether a person of Chinese ancestry can testify in a case.
Yeah.
And the court basically says that, well, the law doesn't allow American Indians, and since originally people thought Columbus was lost and he was in Asia, everybody that's an Indian is probably an Asian too, and everybody that's an Asian is probably an Indian, so we won't let this guy testify. And then, of course, the court goes crazy and says, oh, it'd be terrible if we allowed those people to testify in our courts. We might find them voting or on the bench.
Right.
And incredibly racialized language in the opinion. But it involves the question of can an Asian testify, because it wasn't specifically mentioned in the statute. So we may be closer in connection than you think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I wish we had more time because I really have enjoyed talking with you, and I would love to, you know, continue the conversation. But thank you, Lawrence, for being my special guest today. And congratulations again on receiving the ABA's 2012 Thurgood Marshall Award. I will be there
Thank
to
you so
dinner.
much.
I'm Aurora Austriaco, and thank you for watching this edition of Justice and Law Weekly.
Closed captioning for Justice and Law Weekly is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices in support of quality public television for the Chicago area.